David's bio. And I was a French major in college, but just a disclaimer, I don't speak it as often as I used to. So forgive me any unusual or awkward pronouncements. David Hoon Kim took his first creative writing workshops in France at the Sorbonne and other places before attending the Iowa Writers Workshop, the Stegner program, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. He writes in both English and French. He is the author of Paris is a Party, Paris is a Ghost, which of course we're going to be talking about this morning. And his work has appeared in the New Yorker, the New York Review of Books. In French, he has published fiction in Brève, Le Sabord, Rue Saint-Ambroise, and X, Y, Z, La Revue de la Nouvelle. Excerpts of his writing in French can be found at his website, davidhoonkim.com. And I thought we would begin with just maybe a quick summary, if David doesn't mind, just talking a little bit about the mysterious title of his book and perhaps a bit of background, because he did publish some of these chapters as standalone short stories in these prestigious publications. And those of you who are not maybe in the know about the literary world, these are truly top tier publications, and FSG is an amazing publisher. So he's an accomplished writer. And as you probably know, if you've read the book, you're certainly aware of that. But if you haven't yet read the book, I encourage you to do so. And I'm sure David would love that too. So David, what about the title? Could you talk a little bit about that? And then also maybe a bit about, how you describe this novel to people who inevitably say, what is your book about?
Sure. To start with the title, it's actually a composite of two different readings that I came across while writing the book, or maybe a little bit before it. So Paris is a Party is actually my English translation of the French title of Hemingway's A Movable Feast. In French, the French title is Paris une fête. So I translate that into Paris is a Party because in a way I was trying to, I guess, sort of write against Hemingway and the whole tradition of the depictions of expatriate life, which I guess I was trying to move away from that kind of depiction of possibly because I think that we've maybe seen enough stories of things like that, and which I guess I was trying to kind of depict, for example, a different slice of expatriate life in a way, with my character who is a Japanese Dane who was adopted by Danish parents and who grew up in Denmark, and who at the beginning of the book is actually he's studying French literature, and actually he has abandoned his thesis at the beginning, and he's now actually seeing a Japanese girl from Japan, an art student, and at the beginning of the book she has locked herself in her room and refused to come out, and he doesn't really know what to do. And it's at that moment that he comes across this sort of mysterious ad at the Sorbonne from a French physicist looking for someone to translate his treatise. And so he decides on a whim sort of to take up that job because he doesn't want to, because he doesn't want to, can you hear me better now? Or so he doesn't want to I kind of lost the thread.
He was translating for your Borgesian figure, and I kept thinking about Borges, and I think you actually made a reference to him in the novel, or maybe not. I just feel like I've been reading about Borges lately.
I wouldn't be surprised if I did. And so he starts working for this physicist, and I think as kind of a distraction from his own failures with his schoolwork and so on. So that's kind of the starting point of the book. And so to get to the second part of my title, Paris is a Ghost, that's actually a line from an Anne Carson poem that I really like, Ghost Q&A. And I mean, I guess you could say there are a lot of ghosts in the book, including maybe Fumiko, who is kind of in the process of becoming a sort of ghost because she's not present when the book starts. You don't really see her. She's already locked herself in a room. So, and there are other ghosts too, I think, notably the French language, I think, because I wrote this book in English, but I couldn't help but think while I was writing it that writing it in English for me was like meant that I didn't write it in French. So there was always like this sort of the French language that was always kind of the decision not to write in French was always there. Not that I consciously set out to not write in French. It's just um, biographically, it made more sense to write it in English because that's what I've been writing in for all these years. And it didn't really make sense in my situation to write a book in French at the time. I wasn't thinking along those terms. I was thinking more practically. And so, anyway, long story short, that's why that's it's sort of a non-decision, I guess. But at the same time, I can't help but think of it because actually, when I write in English, I can't help but often translate things from French because I think I've only ever written about France in English. That is to say that when I write in English, I've always written about French situations, French uh, locations. So the dial and with French characters often. So it's often been with dialogues, for example. I would often just kind of, as a thought experiment, say the dialogue in French and then translate it into English, for example. Yeah. So that yeah.
Yeah, I was really impressed that you published in French and also written in French, or so organically, because it's not easy to write. And I'm guessing French is not your native language, though. And is English your native language?
No, English is actually my second language, though I did learn it when I was 8 years old. So I didn't really have to let's say work for it. I mean, it just kind of when you're 8 years old, I think you can still learn languages pretty easily.
Yeah.
So, but obviously there's yeah. So so French will be my third language, but which I
And
did have to work for.
what is your name? Is it Korean? Is that your first language?
Yeah, it's Korean.
Would you mind putting in your headphones? Because I've noticed a couple of, if you have them handy, just a couple
Yeah,
of
no, okay,
viewers
no
or
problem.
participants have noted that they're having a little trouble hearing.
Sure.
Thanks, David. One thing I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned Fumiko, who is sort of this galvanizing character who appears in the initial chapters of the novel, which I'll just show you. It's a beautiful book. And also the inside of it was so artfully produced. And these end papers are, not every book, as you probably know, has end papers. It's actually a sign to me always when I buy a book that the publisher has really invested in the design. And it's just a beautiful novel. And also it's just, as I said, it's highly literary and beautifully written. But just to return to a topic that David mentioned just a moment ago regarding Fumiko, who's this character we never actually see very clearly. She is very ghostly and she does haunt the novel. Let me ask David the question I prepared. Fumiko, who is Henrik's girlfriend, is a character whose ghost haunts the entire novel. We never really catch a clear glimpse of her, as I just mentioned. Do you see her symbolizing the experience of being an immigrant who wants to assimilate but can't for one reason or another? And Henrik himself is such an interesting character because he is Japanese born, but then he was adopted by a Danish couple, lived in Denmark, learned Danish, then moved to France, learned French, of course, almost as a speaker, and became a translator. I guess that's a lot that I just said. But regarding Fumiko, how do you see her as someone who just can't quite assimilate?
I didn't really. I have to say that I didn't really see her in those terms. It's true that she is having trouble at the beginning with from the glimpses you get of her in flashbacks that uh, she has more difficulty speaking French than Henrik. Um, I don't know if and there are frequent misunderstandings between them. Um, but I think if I saw her as anything, I think it would be as I said sort of more like just I would say that maybe even that she's kind of the impetus for Henrik wanting to become a translator. Um, because and this is something that only occurred to me retroactively is that I wondered if if all this time he was trying to it was a failure to translate her in terms of him being able to understand where she was coming from and perhaps that he never really understood her in the end, and that's something he realized. And so maybe his attempts to become a translator and to translate documents and things like that is in a way deep down inside it's him trying to translate her. It's just something that occurred to me. It's not something that I was thinking about while I was writing, obviously.
Mhm.
But so perhaps she was the thing that she could never translate in the end, just the thing that remained untranslatable. So I guess that's how I would see her. Um, yeah, I
You
guess I
know,
didn't really think. Yeah, go ahead.
go ahead, go ahead.
I mean, I guess I didn't really think of his Henrik or Fumiko as immigrants. I don't know. Maybe it's semantics, but um, I guess he becomes an immigrant later. But at the stage at the beginning of the book, they just seem they're both kind of students abroad, and he doesn't know how long he will stay, and she doesn't know how long she will stay, and it's not really. I don't know. Maybe they're just kind of living in the moment, and um, yeah.
Mhm. I'm wondering too, I see Henrik as a really lonely character, and I think loneliness is a great theme. It's a great literary theme that perhaps, especially in the last year and a half with the pandemic and all the enforced separation, is even more apropos of the present moment. But Henrik himself, I'm just going to read you another question that I wrote about this. It's related. He's a romantic, at least as I see him, and he wants to be permitted to love and protect the people he most adores, Fumiko, and later Emmanuelle, the daughter of his friend Renee, whom he met when studying to become certified as a translator. Is it your view that Henrik has the most noble caretaking intentions with both Fumiko and Jem, but he feels powerless by his outsider status, so to speak, to protect them? And I don't mean outsider in the sense of being an immigrant, but with Emmanuelle, he's not her father. And of course, they have this game where they pretend he is her father because he's actually a more fitting father figure than her actual father, who's preoccupied with work and other commitments and obligations. And Fumiko, of course, he can't reach her as deeply as he wants to because she's so tormented by her problems that she left Japan to escape.
Um, yeah, I think as you said, he's a better father to her than her own father. But at the same time, I think their relationship is almost mostly one of friendship. I think despite what Henrik may want to be and despite what Jem wants from him, I think maybe they're more friends than anything else. Kind of like um, maybe deep down inside that's what they are. So I guess I was trying to maybe explore that kind of weird kind of friendship between an adult and a small child. Just I've always been interested in discrepancies like that.
Mhm.
Some of my favorite books are depictions of, I guess, platonic relationships between these two very disparate, two different people. I think, for example, my favorite Murakami novel is Dance, 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 which centers around the Murakamian protagonist and this 12-year-old girl that he kind of is roped into taking care of while her parents or her artist parents are kind of just sitting around. So, and that's just an example. There's also um, I don't know. There's also the professional. I mean, that's one of my favorite movies, and so anyways, yeah, I was just trying to, I guess, depict that kind of relationship that's parental, uh, uh, necessarily, but at the same time, something kind of neither here nor there, and I think that's kind of what Henrik is, right? He's not, um, he's kind of like, so he's kind of like this sort of like living on this sort of B side of life. He's not really like
Mm.
he's always at the edge of people's. When the story begins, he's neither really a student anymore because he's given up his thesis, and then he's not really seeing Fumiko anymore because she's locked herself in a room, and this is I guess in even the way he thinks, when he at the beginning of the book when he's fantasizing about better times that may come, he doesn't think about the Champs Elysees, but thinks about the street that's on the opposite side of the axe of the Arc de Triomphe, and he thinks about going down that street and not the Champs Elysees because I don't know. So I just maybe
That Avenue
wondered.
de la Grande Armée, that's
Yeah,
the one
yeah,
with
yeah.
the
With
motorcycle dealerships. And
yeah, yeah.
there's such an interesting hybrid quality to the novel. Those of you who read it or will read it, David's got a number of literary influences, but he also has this sort of just, he's this guide who leads people through the streets of Paris and takes them to sites where horrific North Korean related events have happened. I wondered, I'm guessing those are actually based on fact. Is that true? Like where the daughter of one of the North Korean functionaries took her life, and there's just a lot of, you know, macabre events that this guide talks about, and it becomes something of a sensation among tourists.
Yeah, those are all real. There are quite a few North Koreans who go to Paris because obviously it's easier to, I don't know if it's right now still the case, but I think in the past it's always been much easier to get it, you know, move in and out of Europe, Western Europe. So I mean, um, yeah, a lot of North Korean high functionaries and obviously have been educated in France and in Paris. Um,
That's something I don't think a lot of people know. That was really fascinating.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I found it fascinating when I found that out too. So that's kind of why I wanted to. That's why I put it in there. And yeah, I mean, it's not quite so. I kind of feel like I've been kind of betrayed by current events because things in North Korea are so grim now that I think, in a way, I try to my approach of being slightly ironic and slightly dark humor kind of maybe isn't the right note at the moment. So, but but at the same time, when I was writing it, I think, yeah, I maybe or rather things were not quite so grim in North Korea, although they're always grim. But yeah,
One of the listeners or viewers he asked for a brief summary of the novel. I think the thing is there isn't really this catch-all summary that David can give. And when he was addressing everyone at the beginning of our conversation, you know, he alluded to the complexity of the structure, which is, David, you could probably say it better than I can because it is your book, but there's the central character, Henrik, who brings together the other characters, Fumiko, Emmanuel, and Renee. So I would say, would you say those are the four most important characters in the book? And then we see them
yeah,
in these episodes that are linked, but they're also sort of standalone in some cases. And
right.
Henrik is fighting loneliness. I mean, I think that's what I saw as one of the main thematics that overarches the entire novel.
Yeah, I mean, in two words, the book is about loneliness, but more specifically, yeah, it's about kind of the aftermath of Henrik, the main protagonist, relationship with Fumiko, the aftermath of their relationship because they're after the first chapter, they're no longer together. So it's just basically just the aftermath of that relationship and the people he encounters after that while living in Paris. Each section is actually devoted to a different. The book is composed of three sections, and each section is composed. It centers around a different person um, that he is deeply involved with. And the first section would be Fumiko. The second section would be this girl he meets on a train, but is never able to. But he meets on a train, and then they kind of pursues throughout the chapters of the middle section, and then the last section, as we were talking about, centers around Jem, the daughter of his best friend, of his classmate at the translation school that he attends later.
And then we meet another interesting character who's an older woman who is at the school as well and learning to be a translator. And it was just really interesting because I felt like in some ways you wrote something of a mystery. Would you say that this is a kind of a mystery novel, but also of course very literary and character driven?
I mean, that would be nice if it worked kind of as that. I'm glad because yeah. Can I ask what you thought? What made you think that?
Well,
What
I
about it
kept
made you think? Yeah, go
why
ahead.
I thought it was a mystery. I think part of it is because the character who is what is her name again? I'm sorry, I can't remember. The older woman, and she has the
Ma-
unusual hair where she has gray and
Marivan.
red.
Yeah, Marivan. Marivan.
That's
Yeah.
yes. I was trying to figure out what she didn't seem like a bad actor in the sense that she was there to make mischief or do anyone harm, but there was also that interesting, they're in to the participants, they're in school and they have to take these rigorous exams. And so Henrik later learns that most everyone appears to be cheating and he hasn't been cheating. And then when he decides he's going to cheat so he can pass, he finds out that, oh, well, you know, this is a normal thing. So But then he also has these interludes where he sees her on the platform in the subway, and other people sort of appear and disappear. So I felt maybe it was also just the dreamlike quality of the book, but I did keep looking. I felt like they call them Easter eggs if you're watching film or TV, where they plant these clues that you then, if you're in the know about a certain, like Star Wars, most people who are obsessed with Star Wars know so many, they know everything, they know the backstory of every character, so they can find clues and meaning and things that most people wouldn't be able to. So I felt like in a way David was making use of that in this novel, where I wondered, like, ultimately, were these characters going to resurface? But in fact, what I loved was that in the case of Machevan, I can't remember, is that her name?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. she, well, I don't want to say a spoiler, but I think I loved the fact that in part this book just sort of mirrors the ephemeral, you know, like our experiences in life, and the fact that some people want to impose meaning on events that resist it. And that ultimately was one of the things that I thought. I'm like, not every experience actually does mean something, in the sense that it has, you know, reverberations for future events. They just happen and then they're over. And I felt like this is really an existential novel as well as sort of a mystery. It is very French, I think, certainly.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I think it is existential. I mean, I think maybe even Henrik's identity, um, quote unquote, crisis is kind of existential. It's not really ethnic. It's not really, he's not searching for his roots. He's not like, it's not in relation to a bigger, it's not in relation to his minority ethnic group. It's more like just him as a human trying to figure out if he exists or not, in a way, to put it that, yeah.
Yeah, there is that feeling like, you know, everything, it's not like you would ever do this as an experienced writer where, like, for example, as a writing teacher, you try to tell students not to end stories with, and then I woke up and it was all a dream. One thing that's really seductive about David's book is that the dream continues. It just doesn't end, at least as I interpreted it. And, you know, I want to ask you a few other questions, which are more based on the language. And one thing I'm wondering is, Henrik speaks French, Danish, and English, but his parents were Japanese, his birth parents. Having been raised in Denmark by adoptive parents, he of course learned to speak Danish instead of Japanese. And intensifying the importance of language to his identity, he's also a translator. I'm curious about your decision to portray him as a man who isn't able to communicate in the language he would have spoken if he hadn't been adopted. How do you see this affecting his character?
I think, and this could be like me bringing my personal view into it, but I think if he had grown up in Japan, if he hadn't been adopted, I think typically he would just have spoken Japanese and a little bit of English, just enough to maybe, like, you know, give tourist directions, but really, like, that's the average Japanese person doesn't really speak other languages. So I think from a linguistic point of view, he would be um, someone quite different, because, like, I think, yeah, I agree that language is linked to identity, and so he would speak a lot fewer languages, I guess, and so I think linguistically he would be less rich. I'm sure he would be more rich in other ways. It's not black and white, of course. So I think he would be someone quite different, someone who speaks much fewer languages. Um, would that have made him less conflicted? I don't know. Possibly. I think uh, that kind of haziness about his own identity, I think maybe is something uh, that I did want to explore through the fact that he speaks all these different languages, um, and that knowing more languages, I think, possibly brings about a deeper awareness of things in general, but at the same time, it also can bring in conflict too. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but um,
No, it does. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean,
So I guess, yeah. I guess from my personal point of view, I think in a way, like, he's his life is more rich because he was adopted rather than if he hadn't been. Not saying that being adopted is automatically, being transnationally adopted is not automatically a great thing, and that it's better than not being adopted. But I often see stories about people who grew up in Europe from Asian countries who were adopted, who were born in an Asian country and brought up in Europe. I see there's a lot of. I actually viewed a lot of documentaries about adoptees in Netherlands and Scandinavia and things like that. And I can't help but think that if they hadn't been adopted, they would probably not. I can't help but think that they would be less linguistically rich if they'd grown up in Asia, in Korea or Japan. So, which were the stories that I was looking at. So,
Why
yeah.
did you choose to have, do you have personal ties to Denmark? I had a college roommate who was Danish, so I was really interested in the fact that I'm still good friends with her, and she moved here when she was 8, actually, to the US. So similar to you, she picked up English and speaks it without, you can't tell that was a Danish native speaker. But have you lived in Denmark? Is that why you decided
I've
to?
never. I did spend one night in a Danish in Copenhagen airport on the way back from Paris, from France to the US once, but I've never technically set foot in Denmark before. I've never, and I didn't really want to go there while I was writing the book because in a way it's not really Denmark that I, I think I said this somewhere before, but in a way, like it's kind of like Kafka's China. He never, Denmark, the Denmark that I'm portraying is sort of like, I don't know, like I wouldn't say it's complete fantasy because I was obviously trying to make it somewhat realistic, but at the same time, it's kind of a stand-in for something, I don't know quite what, but something. And um, also, it occurred to me that if the other reason that I made him Danish was that I actually saw this sort of Norwegian gangster movie that had this Danish assassin who happened to be Asian. I can't remember if he was I think he was Japanese Asian, like an adoptee. And yeah, it was kind of it was kind of racist the way it was portrayed because and I just kind of thought that what if that I wrote about that character? What if that's the character what if I write an entire book around him? And so yeah, I think maybe that was there, although I wasn't thinking about that movie when I was writing the book, but it occurred to me afterwards that, yeah, maybe that was also that.
One of my questions too that I had written in advance was regarding your influences when you were writing this book, and you mentioned the film The Professional, which of course was made into an American, or was it only an American? Did Luc Besson film it in English with Jean Reno and a young Natalie Portman? Was there also a French version, or was that the only version?
I think there was only a version, but of course Jean Reno is a French actor, so and he was playing, I guess, a sort of a Spanish kind of immigrant. I don't know, but it was kind of not very clear. But
And
yeah,
films are important in your book too. You have Emmanuel becomes a young star of film, and she gets involved in the film industry in Italy in particular. So what are your ties and your interests in cinema?
um, yeah, like you said, there are a couple of films that I think that I went back to or was in the back of my mind. I would have to say the main film would be Nouvelle, Le Feu Follet, which is about which is adapted from a book by the same name by Thierry La Rochelle, which I also have read and liked. But
What was it
I guess
again?
I
I
saw
didn't catch it. I didn't catch the title.
the author. You mean the author whose book is adapted from, or do you mean the movie? The movie is Le Feu Follet. Le Feu
Oh, Le
Follet, I
Feu
think.
Follet.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess the American title is the Fire Within, but yeah,
Okay.
so it was adapted from a book that I read the book after the movie, but I also like the author. But anyways, yeah, so that book that it's a movie that I've seen many times, and it's about someone who can't really seem to kind of uh, live his life in a way. He can't really. He has. There's a kind of disconnect that keeps him from really having fulfilling relationships with other humans, especially women. And he's. I don't know. It's a pretty depressing movie, but it's something about it. Um, is so captivating to me because of this sort of it's filmed over the course of 24 hours, a little over 24 hours, and I just like that kind of that character, that kind of sort of grasping at life and not able to, always kind of living on, like not quite in the moment, but kind of beyond the moment, not quite there, and not quite in the present. I guess maybe that was an influence. So that movie, and the other movie that I would say is Irma Vep. It's an early
Oh, right. Is that
Olivier
Olivier
Assayas.
Assayas?
Yeah, yeah, Assayas. And I saw that movie when it came out in the late 90s, and it really made an impression on me. Just the way
Vampire.
Paris is, yeah, vampires, and the way Paris was portrayed, and there's just so much energy in that movie, and I don't know, just um,
Well, then Assayas also made that ghost movie with the ghost story with Kristen Stewart a
personal,
number of years ago.
which I also like, Personal Shopper. It didn't get, I don't
Yeah,
think it was critically lauded, but I really like that movie too.
it was very slippery and very atmospheric. Like I mean, I love his movies, and he's definitely got a
Yeah,
big range. Probably some of the attendees have seen some of his films too. He's sort of an auteur, I think you could say. Um, but I just have a few more questions if we have time. And I want to talk a little bit. Yesterday, when we were doing our check-in before today with Efren, Renee, and Aimee, people, of course, you probably know who work at the Alliance Française, we were talking about David's decision, you know, to write in English, but then also the fact he writes in French. And the discussion came up, well, if you write in English, you have more readers. And David was saying, well, his admiration and love of the French language, why don't you talk a little bit about that? The fact that, I mean, I'm just curious, and why not German? Like, what drew you to French initially as a
I
writer
think,
and a speaker?
yeah, going back, if you go back to that, the very beginning, I think it was, it spoke to me in the right way at the right moment when I was, 19, very impressionable, and uh, and so I think it was just a matter of it being, me coming into contact with it, which I did through literature, through actually French poems, um, Rimbaud, Lautréamont, people like that. I think I went to read them in the original when I first encountered them, and so I think it was just the right moment, and also at the time, and just growing up, I didn't really, like I said, I came to the U.S. when I was 8, so although English wasn't a language I had to really struggle to learn, it's not really. I feel that it's not really my language, and at the same time, I know it better than Korean, which I also speak, but at the same time, I stopped going to school in Korean after the age of 8, so uh, I stopped speaking it outside of the home. So whereas, and so I never really felt that I had a language, and so maybe that was, the French was there at the right time. And so when I came across it at the age of 19,
Mhm.
and so um, yeah. So but then at the same time, so I actually started writing fiction in French, and so while living in Paris, attending creative writing workshops um, and trying to write fiction seriously. And so it's only when I came back to the US because I got into the Iowa Writers Workshop that I started writing in English. And um, so all that to say that uh, there was no real. So all these years I actually just wrote in English, although because it didn't make sense to write in French while living in the US. So I was trying to be published in English, and so I don't know. I think and I wrote this book in English obviously, and so um, uh, so I guess maybe I think over the years, I think the urge to write in French has become pretty strong. So that's kind of why I've started writing actively in French now, whereas before I didn't, because yeah, I wasn't really thinking about it. And so, um, uh, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question in terms of
Yeah, it does,
literature.
but I'm wondering too, like, how did you first? I was introduced to French in seventh grade when we had to choose between Spanish and French, and for classes. And actually, I signed up for Spanish, but it was full, so they put me in French, which was sort of a fateful thing because then I went to college and became a French major. But it was sort of happenstance in my case, but how did you get introduced to the French language and French culture? Were your
Well,
parents Francophiles or other family
not at
members?
all. I think what I liked is that retrospectively, it seems to me that I had no reason, I had absolutely no reason to learn French or to be drawn to it, and yet I was. And I think, like I said, it was just it being there at the right time when I needed something. I guess I can't. I think it could have been German, maybe. I've tried for many years to learn German as a fourth language, but I've never been able to really get into it. I have, but I think it was just and like I said, I started learning it. The urge to learn it came because I wanted to read these French poets, these French symbolist poets in the original language. So it was definitely through literature, and um, yeah, so it was definitely through literature. But at the same time, something about the language I think just kind of clicked or just kind of spoke to me.
It reminds me a little bit of Jhumpa Lahiri. If you probably know that she's been writing in Italian and then translating her own work, and she lives in Rome part of the year. And she first encountered Italian when she was in her early 20s on a trip to Florence, I think, with her sister. And then she just realized some part of her that she'd been missing her whole life up to that point had suddenly revealed itself to her. So she stepped into Italian language, studies. And like you sort of with French, I think actually probably quite similar in that you both just became, enraptured, I think you could say fairly, that this was something that was going to define a significant part of your life and your identity. And David, I'm wondering, maybe before we go to questions, would you be able to read an excerpt from the first page? Amy made this suggestion. I love it.
I didn't really prepare. I would have to grab my book, my copy of the book, which is in another room. But should I
If
go
you
and
don't
get
have
it?
it, that's fine. It's
I don't have
fine.
it next
It's
to
just
me.
sort of
I'm
a spur of
sorry.
the moment suggestion. So one, I do have a couple more questions, but I'm wondering if
Sure.
the audience has any that they might like to ask of David. If not, of course, I'm happy to ask more. I have quite a few here. I see we have a hand. Yes, go ahead. And let me unmute you, or you can unmute yourself, I think. Okay, there we go.
Unmute myself. Yeah. Hi, how fast, Sammy? Yeah, those of us who speak multiple languages, I was born speaking Arabic and Greek, and then I forgot the Greek because I was learning French, and then English, and then German, and to mono. What do you call that? Monolinguals. This is apparently in America, at least, it's a sign of great intelligence to be able to speak multiple languages. And of course, I lead them to believe that that's the case. But 0 to 10, I think Christine was talking about her friend, her Danish friend who came here when she was 7. It's 0 to 10. All the circuits are open and you can adapt them. They pretty much shut down at 12. And so you can tell if somebody has come to America past that age, 12, 13. A very famous American, who some of you may have heard him, Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger speaks with an extremely thick accent. He came to America when he was 13. That was it. The circuits were closed. Question for David. I'm sorry, I had to get this out of my system. Do you have a feel for the migration of Asians to Europe? What's the size? You're talking about adopted children, for instance, from Asia. What's the magnitude of the community? Is it millions, hundreds of thousands? What?
I would say
who have been taken from Asia to different Western countries, or at least to Europe. If
I don't have exact figures,
yeah,
but I would say it's less than 100,000, but it's still a lot because I think most Asian adoptees, other than to the US, go to Scandinavia. So and then maybe third is France. So I think there's, relatively speaking, Um, it's quite a lot. Scandinavia actually has the most Asian Korean adoptees after the US, or maybe similar to the US. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's a lot. So it's a lot for what it is, but in terms of pure numbers, it's not that much. I would, like I said, less than 100,000. I don't know if that answers your question. And yeah, I agree that it is easy to when you're 8, it is very easy to learn foreign languages. Like I said, that was my case. But at the same time, I don't really. It's not. I think at the same time, it's not quite the same thing as having been born speaking English. I think it's. I don't know if you know what I'm. I think English still kind of doesn't. I think culturally, for example, it feels. I feel kind of not within it completely, and there are things that I find very like that I don't um, quite feel natural doing, that are very American. Like I don't know. So I would say that it's not linguistically up to age 10. Yes, you can learn any language, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you're culturally also you're a native. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thank you, Hafez, for your question. We have a question, actually, a really interesting question from Amy. Do you mind asking it, Amy? I think Efren can spotlight you about the Iowa Writers Workshop.
Oh, okay. I don't know if David's gonna like this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. What I wrote is that I often feel that attending the Ohio Writers Workshop, I'm not sure I'm saying it the right way, but
Iowa.
Iowa
City.
Iowa,
Yeah.
Ohio,
yes.
Iowa. For me, it's so confusing. I'm so sorry. So, attending the Iowa Writers Workshop shaped a certain type of writing. You could almost say institutional writing for literature. But you seem to have escaped the mold. How did you do it?
Well, that's very flattering. I don't know. At least I'm flattered.
Okay, good. You're not mad.
No, no. I don't. Can I ask what you mean by the mold, though? If you don't mind.
Well, I don't have name that comes, but I recognize it as soon as I read it. I usually start with short stories. It's often quite realistic. It's there's depth to the character. It's often based in America. I mean, it's changing because there's new voice that are coming up of Iowa, and I like that, voices like yours and like the Vietnamese guy who writes those books that are so spectacular, The Informer.
Viet Quinn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he go to Iowa? I didn't realize that. He's out here in California as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, I feel you have such a strong personality in your writing that there's no institution that could put their stamp on you. So how did you manage there? How did you manage there? By going to a writing school.
I was coming from a different literary culture than most of the people there. I don't want to lump everyone there into a basket, but I think it's common that a lot of people, I mean, like the writers that are most often read are the writers who are published in America by America. And so I think, I don't know, I think maybe like having been educated in France, my influences, just the writers that I go back to are often often French writers or Francophone writers, and just that could have been a factor. I'm not sure if I'm really answering the question, but it's
I think it's your poetry, David, in part. that your writing is very lyrical in some ways. And,
Funny you should say that. I don't know.
stylistically, yeah.
I never thought of myself as a lyrical writer, but I'll take it. I don't mind. I think I just try to write as directly as possible, but yeah, I don't know. I do read a lot of poetry. Okay, maybe not that much, but I do read poetry. So yeah.
And there's poetry in the novel. And also, those of you who aren't familiar with Anne Carson, she's a Canadian classicist who's also a poet, and she won the Chicago-based MacArthur Foundation's fellowship a number of years ago, also known as the Genius Grant. So she appears in the novel, her work anyway, not she herself as a character. But David, we have another question from you from Claire. Efren, do you mind spotlighting her? Hi, Claire.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump on the Anne Carson because I'm obsessed with her. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with her. She's kind of known for her translations that are sort of foreignizing, one might say, as opposed to domesticating, and also for using language to sort of create a sense of displacement. And I was wondering what other translators you were interested in, and also her writing is very unique, and I think it's affected by her work in translation. I'm thinking also of Lydia Davis, who's a great French to English translator and does her own writing in English, which is very different. She's known for her really sort of economy of language and micro short stories. And I was wondering how your translation work affects your personal writing and or the writing of translators, be it the work that they translate or their own writing, how that has maybe influenced you, if at all, and whose work you're interested in.
Okay, that's a lot of
It's a lot of, sorry.
Yeah, just to go back to what you were saying about Anne Carson's, as you said, foreignizing style. That's, I think, in a way, she comes from the same school as Nabokov, and his famous translation of Eugene Onegin, the great Russian poem Eugene Onegin, is it got a lot of flack when it was published because of the way it supposedly was written in bad English, because it was very some called it unreadable. And so I think the way you described Anne Carson's translations made me think about Nabokov's translation of Eugene Onegin, and just his views on translation in general, which was that, and no matter how strange it sounds in English, that it was translator duty to replicate that sort of the strangeness of the foreign work and not Americanize it or dumb it down or whatever. And so and to be honest, my personal experience is that I've never translated anything other than technical stuff. I've never translated in a professional capacity literature of any kind. I mean, other than stuff I do on my own. So I don't have any experience. I can't really speak to what it's that on a professional level because I've only ever done technical stuff. And I don't really translate anymore. So I don't know. Was there? I can't remember the last part of your question if there was one. But
Yeah, do you find yourself, it seems like maybe you find yourself attracted to writers who either do translation themselves, or like Nabokov and Carson, Murakami wrote first in English and then translated it into Japanese for his first novel. So is that something that attracts you? And if so, why?
yes, it definitely attracts me. I would say that among the writers I go back to a lot are often, or maybe even most, are multilingual writers, and not only multilingual writers, but writers who have written in more than one language, or who wrote in a language that wasn't their own. So and what attracts me about that, I don't know, it's just because I guess it speaks to me because that's just kind of where I'm coming from, and just I don't take language for granted. It's not like this abstract thing, but always something that's the product of a conscious choice on some level or another. I Like I said, when I was writing this book, I was very conscious of writing it in English. I was conscious of writing because I was writing about Paris, and so every sentence, every chapter chapter was about me trying to translate another culture into English. That meant what it's supposed to be, cultural things like I don't know, brand names, authors, uh, things that are not the same here. So you have to think about like how you want to convey it and how much you want to for example, explain. I think there was, for example, in the very beginning of the book, it said that Miko was living in the same residence hall as Henrik, but they're actually going to different schools, completely different schools. And in the US, you wouldn't have two people from completely different schools living in the same dormitory. So I didn't want to explain that, for example, but so I didn't. I wrote it as though it might be because of course, if you're translating a French author, for example, you're not gonna explain that in the text, although you might explain it in a footnote or an endnote. But so I tried to use that approach when I was writing my book. So yeah. So all that to say that it kind of felt like I was translating my own book. So
You know, David, this brings a question to mind that I remember thinking about when I was reading Paris as a Party, Paris as a Ghost. It's very Sebaldian. I'm guessing you've read W.G. Sebald,
yeah.
who there is, I mean, I love his work. I've read most of his books. I think he's had a couple released posthumously, but he's a German writer. Those of you who aren't familiar with him, he wrote in German and he was translated by very good translators into English. And probably his most famous two books are Austerlitz and The Emigrants. But there is like a quality to your work as well, where you're kind of like a magpie, like Sebald, where you're bringing in these historical details and as I mentioned before, there's a hybrid quality where you're commingling nonfiction and fiction, but also poetry. Sebald doesn't really do a lot with poetry, but he definitely writes these, novels that are discursive to a certain extent. Like I think your novel is too, but it's something also that's really, seductive. The fact that you range all over the place intellectually, but at the same time, there's such an emotional heart to your book. Was he also someone that you have studied or read?
Yeah, I've actually read a few of his books, and I've greatly enjoyed them. I don't know him as well as I would know that I'm familiar with the works of Nabokov or Polanyi, for example. But yes, he was definitely someone who was kind of in the, kind of in the back of my mind, or just kind of that I might have thought about. And yeah, it's extremely flattering to be thought of in the same sentence as Sebald. And I just find his example extremely interesting because he is a multilingual writer who chose not to write in another language. I think he was more than capable of writing all of his books in English, but he didn't. And that's another category of multilingual writers that I'm really fascinated by, which are writers who could have but didn't. Another would be Joyce, who could have written in Italian, but he never did. All he wrote were letters to his daughter in Italian. But yeah. So to go back to Sebald, yeah, definitely it was an influence.
And it's interesting. Oh, go ahead. Did I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
That was it. Yeah, that was it.
It's interesting because I was really fascinated when I found out that Nabokov wrote Lolita in English, and which was essentially his third language, because of course he grew up speaking Russian and then he learned French and then he learned English. And Lolita, despite the political problems with it these days, is this amazingly poetic and beautifully written novel, and also just such a perverse page turner. What were you going to say, David?
Well, I think it's kind of the languages of Nabokov are kind of, yeah, it's very interesting because he learned actually English early on, and he learned it kind of all at once in a way, like with his Russian. And so I think, yes, like you said, he actually learned to write in English quite late in life. Well, he learned to write professionally, I guess you could call it, in English late in life, but it was a language that he'd been speaking all his life. And so yeah, so I think
did he write most of his books in English? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
He actually I could go on for hours about this. He actually started writing in Russian after he fled Russia after the revolution to Western Europe, and so he wrote the first half of his books or the first 10 or so books in Russian. And then after that, he lived for a couple of years in France and wrote one short story and 2 essays in French. And then after that, he fled before the arrival of the Germans to the US, and that's where he wrote his books in English. So yeah, that's so yeah, he wrote Lolita in English, but I think that book is so interesting because when I read that, I just think that there's so many like Frenchisms in that book. That book is just packed with Frenchisms, and I think there's probably Russianisms that I'm not aware of, but it's just because the character is supposed to be this sort of like French expat. So
Humbert.
It's just I find it to be a really weird sort of like sort of mixed language in a way, like he does for all of his other books. But I think Lolita and Ada, his later book, those are very like pronounced examples of a very like something that I was trying to actually, in my own modest way, emulate, sort of like this sort of French, Gallicized English in a way. Just what would happen if you're always kind of being influenced by another language. Yeah.
One just quick clarification. Helene asked you to just name specifically the Rimbaud and the Lautréamont texts that you were specifically influenced by, or was it their entire body of work?
Well, Rimbaud didn't really write that much, but yeah, I would say the first thing of his I read was Une saison en enfer, that long.
Les saisons en enfer.
Yeah, the
Let me
long
put that in there.
poem. Yeah, and Lautréamont, I mean, he really only wrote one major work and one small work after that. But Les Chants de l'Aldoror would be the work by Lautréamont that, you know, his major work. And yeah.
Chants de Mal. Oh, okay. Thanks, Amy. I think we're just about out of time, and I don't know if any of the Alliance Française folks would like to say anything in parting, but David, I had a great time talking with you, and as you know, I really loved your book, so it's really unique and sticks with you.
I did want to do like a brief wrap up, which was just to say thank you to David, Hoon Kim, and Christine Sneed. And thank you all for being with us. I wanted to mention also that we have, to aid in opening up your brain circuitry or reinforcing what's already there, we have an open house happening on site and remotely, and new classes happening all the time. So visit our website. We have Hervé Letellier coming on November 30th at 11:30 a.m. For those who may not be familiar, or many of you will be, it'll be in French. He's a Prix Goncourt winning author, and he'll be in conversation with Isabelle David to discuss his novel Anomalie. And with that, if there are no further questions, I'd like to have us take a moment to unmute ourselves and give a round of applause to David and Christine.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci à tout le monde. C'était vraiment c'était très amusant.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci David.
Thank you.
Et Aimé, René et Prime aussi.
Oui, merci
À
à tout le
bientôt,
monde.
j'espère.
Ok.